Louder, y'all, louder.
Asian American.
Thank you.
I'm
Someone
the
over
only
there.
one.
Queer.
Queer.
Yes.
Lover.
I'll explain that one. Actually, I'll explain all of them.
Dancer.
All right,
Woo.
so this is the list I came up with. That's how I felt in the moment, in those 30 seconds, 2 months ago in New Paltz. And what I realized later was that I did the same exercise 6 years ago when I was 22, when I was a baby. And at the time, I was still really green to organizing and activism. I was finishing up my term as a board member of NASCON, which stood for the National Asian American Student Conference. I'm not sure if anybody, it's no longer around. All right, never mind. So we did that exercise when I was 22 alongside new board members at a retreat in Detroit, Michigan, where we were visiting the Boggs Center. Anyone hear about that, Boggs Center? You should. Grace Lee Boggs, check it out.
Yes.
And so when I did that exercise at 22, I realized that I saved that paper, right? And it's just like, I'm a pack rat, so it was in my apartment. So I dug up that old list, and I compared it to the list that I did 2 months ago. And it's sort of like that moment when you pop open your middle school yearbook, and you're just like, oh man, like, what was I thinking, you know? So I changed a lot. But fundamentally, some things remain the same. I think that's what I took from seeing me do this exercise 6 years apart. And today I want to share with you some of the stories associated with it, with that exercise, with the 5 identifiers that I laid out for you, and tell you a little bit about my thoughts and my journey, my own story. So does that sound good?
Yeah.
So let's get started. I'm going to do number 1. Can you say that to me one more time again?
Son of immigrants.
Okay. So I put this first. 2 months ago, I put this first. And I think my 22-year-old self would have been like, okay. I mean, it's not that I wouldn't have agreed back then. I think I would have been really surprised that 6 years later I would have put Son of Immigrants first. And so a little background. My father is the youngest of 5 siblings from Hong Kong. And I don't know many details about his story. Hong Kong. Except the only bits and pieces I get from his story is that he endured years of tragedy because of the political tumult in China. Yeah? World War II, fleeing communism, and the like. So we're talking about years of separation. He and his mother, my grandmother, were separated from the rest of the family for about a decade when he was in his teens. And they didn't meet with the rest of the family until they were back in Hong Kong, until they were able to bring everybody to Hong Kong. And that also included the death of his older sister. I never got to know my aunts. And so my mom, she was born and raised in Hong Kong. Her family goes back generations in Hong Kong, and she was born into relative poverty. And my mom and my dad were a doctor and a nurse, respectively.
Aww.
I know, right? So cute. And they actually met in a hospital in Macau when my dad was doing his residency. And so my father, he decided to move to America when the US 1965 Immigration Act was passed, and that allowed high-skilled workers from Asia to come over. And he was able to bring my mom over because you could bring your family over, right? It was family sponsorship. And I don't know why they decided to immigrate to America. I just don't know why. My parents are not the sharing type. My mom would always go, it's like, don't worry about that stuff. Don't focus on the past. Just think about going to grad school and getting a family. They would never ever let me ask questions about that, and they would never give me any answers. But I suspect, like many immigrants, they came here to achieve the American dream and give their kids a better life. Yeah? And they've been very specific about what this looks like. Yeah? So, snap if you feel me on this. Number 1, have a steady job, doctor or lawyer. Number 2, have a family with kids. Number 3, own a home, like a big home in the suburbs somewhere. And number 1 and 3 seem doable, you know, have a steady job and own a home. Steady job, I work in a nonprofit right now that focuses on social justice, so they think I'm a communist. And maybe I'll earn enough to own a home, or I can marry rich. Either one. But it's really difficult for me to think about number two, which is having a family with kids, because my idea of a family is very, very, very different than how my parents think of having a family. I like boys. So I knew at an early age that I couldn't give this life to them, and I felt like such a fraud. You know, my parents went through so much tragedy. They crossed a freaking ocean, and I couldn't deliver. So like most teens at the time, I really disconnected from my family. I felt that if I did, I wouldn't feel so bad. I wouldn't feel so horrible. So I hid the pain I endured growing up, feeling incredibly alone and at times suicidal. But I also hid the joys, you know, the achievements, the new friends, the performances, all the way through my early 20s. And I did this because I thought that they would never, ever fully understand who I was. I just cut them off. And I think now at 28, I regret doing that for so long. I really, really do. I think of all the moments in my life I could have shared with them. And with my parents growing older and also getting a little bit sicker too, I realized they're not gonna be around much longer. Like in 10 years, they may be dead, you know? You at one point in your life, you come to terms with your parents' mortality, and I feel like I'm doing that right now. So nowadays, I feel like I'm always in mourning, right, of what could have been with my parents specifically. And I think about how immigrants leave their homeland, and some of them hold on tightly to the culture they left behind. And their American children are in between. They're not fully theirs. I think this is why a lot of them, including my parents, cling so tight to us or try to be on us, right? Because they feel like they're losing us. And for many of us who crave the freedom to be ourselves, who can't handle this pressure of all this expectation, they just lose us altogether. And I think that's tragic. So now I feel like I've come full circle, you know, like I feel like I realize that this isn't their fault. It's not their fault at all. They just were not equipped. Did they ever imagine how much their children, me, had to struggle growing up? Did they realize that the American dream was seductive, but ultimately deceptive? Would they have changed their expectations of me? And would they have steeled me to the world? I like to think so, but that isn't the point. Those aren't the right questions. I believe now at 28 that they prepared me for the world, that they prepared me for the world in the ways that they know how. They love me the way they know how. And that love predates my birth, when they came to America with dreams of a better life for me. They crossed the world to do that. They crossed an ocean to do that. And they did it when they were my age, 28. I can't imagine doing that right now. Just picking up my life and moving. That shit is powerful. This shit is really powerful. So my relationship with my parents is okay now. It'll never be ideal, but I can salvage what's left. And I am. I'm actually gonna see them next month. Yay! Yay. And they're only in Jersey too, so I should be seeing them all. So, identifying as a son of immigrants, the first thing I put 2 months ago is a nod to my roots, as flawed as they are. And I think now I realize how much of a fundamental part that is to me. Yeah. So that's son of immigrants. Woo! Woo! Oh, God, is that war? Here we go. What does that say?
Asian Americans.
Let me tell you a story about being Asian American. I am. So this was the end. This was number 2 on my list that I made 2 months ago. And so 6 years ago, when I was 22, I also wrote Asian American as an identifier. And it was, but today, how I understand my race is very, very, very different than when it was 22, when I was 22. God, I'm so young. So let me give you a little bit more stories, you know? I mean, you're gonna get all this personal shit from me. So I grew up in Jersey, born and raised in New Jersey, and it was mostly it wasn't one of those Asian enclaves like Edison or New Brunswick or upstate. It was in Somerville, New Jersey. And that shit is white. That place is white. and very suburban and very middle upper class. And so growing up there, I was, oh God, I was an outcast. Woo. And my last name was very weird at the time, Dennis Chin. I was teased about that. Do we have other Chins in the house? Yes! From Hong Kong too?
Yeah, I am.
Yes! Anyway, and I was also, like I had the weird last name, and I was also a really naturally flamboyant kid. So I was the target of a lot of bullying, and it was beyond. It was just awful. It was awful. But I think I look back and I'm thankful that it never got violent. No one ever laid a hand on me, and I think that's really lucky of me. And I also never seized upon the opportunity to hurt myself. That I think a lot of young gay folks do that sometimes. Yeah. But I still feel like a part of me died in middle school and high school. So 6 years ago at 22, I was still coming to terms with this trauma. And this is how I survived that trauma. This is how I eventually got out of it. I found survival in learning about Asian American history in college. That's what it was. It wasn't LGBT history, actually. Because at the time, it was the history that I had for LGBT folks, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, was really white. I didn't really see myself in those stories, but I saw myself in Asian American history. It was Asian American, I found agency in organizing around Asian American issues. And this is what was available to me, and I owe my well-being to the resources and networks available to help. I would stay up all night reading Iris Chang's Chinese in America, Helen Zia's Asian American Dreams, and soaking up all I could from the fierce, fierce women that made up the student group that I applied to be a part of, which was NASCON. So these were my tools for survival. This is how I got over my racial trauma. And it laid the groundwork for reclaiming my life back. So nowadays, 6 years later, Asian Americans for me is not just about survival. It's much, much, much more, and it runs so much deeper. When I was growing up, I was mostly with organizations that thought of activism solely based on self-interest. How can Asian Americans get ahead? How do we break the bamboo ceiling? Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem with that question is that someone will be inevitably left behind. And as a gay man, I knew what this felt like. It would be Asian American activists calling me a fag behind my back, or men blaming fags like me for the feminization of Asian men. Happened all the time. Happened all the time. And you know what? I was not about that. I was not about that shit at all. So I longed for a politics that held my experience and the experiences of other marginalized communities. Gay folks like me, women, other people of color. In those 6 years, 22 to 28, my teachers included Bell Hooks, yes, Audre Lorde, James Baldwin. It also included the work of other queer Asians in New York City that were and are continuing to do work in our communities, and alongside low-income Black and Latino folks. Joo Hyun Kang, Chris Hayashi, Helena Wong, Scott Nakagawa. Like me, they drew their knowledge from these thinkers and positioned themselves as Asian Americans in solidarity with the most marginalized in our society. Through their work, they are laying out an inclusive vision of justice which take aim at the roots of our oppression and stresses solidarity across difference to transform society. See, that's what I was about. I'm about that because that was inclusive of someone like me. And I continually draw strength from these thinkers and these activists that I just name-checked. They're here in New York City, actually, most of them. And I contribute to this vision as an Asian American. Yeah. So that's my story. 3 more to go, 3 more to go. I'm gonna go fast. How much time do I have?
It doesn't matter. Just
Keep
take however much time you want.
Tell all your stories.
Do whatever you want. Lover.
Lover.
Oh, wait, no, that's not the one.
Queer.
I'm doing this in the order that I wrote it down because I think the order matters too, like which one came to me the fastest. So I'm gonna tell you a few stories. So 6 years ago, I put gay, right? When I was 22, I put gay. At 28, I put queer. And I use both interchangeably, but I align more with queer, and I'm gonna give you a little. Hopefully, the stories are gonna help illuminate that for you, because I know that queer sometimes people think it's like an epithet, like the N-word or something like that. But I'm reclaiming that shit. I'm reclaiming it. I'm queer, baby. So I always knew I was gay from a very, very, very young age. And it was Uncle Jesse from Full House. Anybody remember Full House?
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
was thinking about this, I'm like, these people will not know who Uncle Jesse is. And I was like, wait, he's the guy who played the dentist on Glee during that Britney episode.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. I remember that.
Well, I mean, so I think it was him that really made me realize that I was gay. I didn't come out, though, until college. And I was still reeling from a lot of the trauma that I had in middle school and high school and just years of bullying. And in college, claiming Asian American and finding my voice on campus made me feel safe enough to come out. And in college, I did it really slowly. And I was just like sort of putting my toe in the water, just coming out just to like close friends, then expanding it and expanding it and expanding it. And it really all started because a boy said he liked me. His name was Noel. I don't know what he's doing. Anyway, 2 years later, I came out to my mom. Well, I indirectly came out to my mom. So it was senior year of college. I just graduated, and we were having a family dinner at this Chinese restaurant in Edison, actually, Edison, New Jersey. And you know, like this is the time when all the family friends were there. All the family friends, and you know how our parents' family friends are. Like they're all in our business. They're all
Yes.
Oh my God. And so I remember one friend, Anita, oh God, she would not, so she's like, oh, you graduated college, so now you need a girlfriend, right? Are you seeing anybody? Are you seeing anybody? And I was just like, shut the, I didn't say that. I was like, visibly, because like, I was tired, I just graduated that day, and I was just like, I was like, I can't deal with this shit right now. And so my mom, like, she's a real perceptive lady. I gotta give it to her. I give it up to those Hong Kong ladies. So she was like, oh shit. So she decided to drive me home by myself, and we're like she's speeding down the Garden State Parkway, going like 90 miles per hour. And then she turns to me and she goes, "Are you gay?" And I'm like, "Can you pull over?" And I was like, maybe. And I was really touched by what she said. She was like, okay, I love you, but a girl is just better. I was like, okay, Ma. Okay. I just sort of didn't, So even though it was anticlimactic, this was a relatively fortunate experience. I'm actually very lucky to have had this experience, very lucky to have had a mother who thought to say, I love you, the first thing that she said. That's really, really fortunate for me. And this is sort of a process, because I think coming out is a process. This is what I've learned. It's not a singular event. You know, my mom is still sort of working through a lot of what being gay means to her. So at first she thought it just meant me getting HIV and AIDS. So she would have nightmares. She would call me up and she's like, "Do you have AIDS?" I'm like, "What?" And then I tested and I no. And then she thought I was going to be transgender. She thought I was actually going to change my gender from male to female. She just thought that was the natural progression. So we would be walking in the mall, and I'd be like, "Oh, you know, like that's a really cute dress." And she'd look at me and she'd be like, "You can't wear it." And it's one of those things where it's like, "Well, what if I did, Ma? Like, you should be okay with that." And then that would just confuse her even more. And this one time, one more story, because I think it's really funny. My sister had her engagement party, she's getting married for the second time. So I invited my friend Julia, my best friend from San Francisco. She came to the engagement party, and I told my mom, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, your girlfriend?" And I was like, "No, Ma, she's gay like me." It's like really emo. And whatever. So she charmed my parents like crazy. And the next morning, my mom visited my apartment. This is when she had the keys to my apartment because she was going through some health problems. So I was like, "Here, have the keys, Mom. You like just come over whenever you want." I should get those keys back. So she walked in. So. Calvin, you know. I know. So Julie and I are just sleeping in the same bed together because my bed's big enough, and whatever. We're just like sleeping in the same bed. So my mom just like comes right in and she catches me in bed with my friend Julia. So she like runs out of the room screaming and giggling at the same time. I'm like, no ma, no ma. I didn't help that Julie wasn't wearing a bra, but anyway. She was wearing a shirt though, but you know, anyway. So it's a process. So I feel like this is, it's a process, and I feel like these moments allow me to have these type of conversations with her, to let her know that, you know, like, we're not girlfriends, but she is family to me, you know? And I think that's really powerful for her. It resonates for her, and I think it's a process because I'm engaging with her continually, and I think that's what coming out is about. It's like having these conversations all the time, whenever you can, with people who may not be on board with you. Yeah? So that's me being gay. Let me tell you how I learned being queer. So, I learned about being queer from my white friend Harper. Yes, I have white friends. That means I am not racist. He's transgender, which means his body doesn't match the gender that he knows in his mind, that he knows himself to be. He was born in the wrong body, so to speak. And he was the first person that I met that identified as transgender. It was the forgotten T in LGBT. So through him, I met so many new people that just fucked with traditional notions of gender and sexuality. They just turned that shit upside down. It was butch men in heels and leather, high femmes, old dykes, folks whose gender didn't conform to anything. They didn't want to be called man or woman. They were gender non-conforming. And it just opened up my eyes so much. And 1 year into my friendship, Harper underwent top surgery to remove breast tissue, and he was relegated to a chair for 2 weeks. So I visited him in his apartment every day, and I played apples to apples with him because I loved that game. But also just to keep him company and help out however I could. And it was at this moment that I realized that there were so many people around him every day, that there was like 5 people there, and they were there every single day. And he called this his chosen family. And I used this earlier, right? Because his family wasn't around to help him. They didn't support his decision to undergo surgery. So he called upon this chosen family to help care for him while he recovered. It's my friendship with him, that's the reason why I identify as queer today. For me, identifying as queer not only points at my orientation, but also points to my connection with folks like Harper. We are not normal. We do not want to be normal. Queers acknowledge that gender and sexuality lie on a spectrum with a multitude of combinations. And queerness allows ourselves to be exactly who we want to be. And through years of depending on friends to help us, since many of us can't depend on our blood family, queerness means expanding our networks of care. Chosen family, yeah. So what would it mean, the question that I ask myself when I identify as queer is, what would it mean for us to expand our notion of family and community? Queerness, I feel, offers some really transformative answers. And that is the world I want to live in, and why I identify as queer. Yeah.
Ooh.
Cool, okay, so that's my queer story. 2 more. Okay, I'm gonna go faster because I know that I'm running out of time.
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay, so this is really personal. And this is really new to me. So yeah, this was new on my list. So growing up, I rejected love because I didn't think I deserved it. I just went through the motions and I hurt a lot of people along the way. So, and I feel in my heart that what was missing was love for myself. I felt like I wasn't worthy of love, so I just flat out rejected it. I coped with being an outcast in white suburban New Jersey by believing the messages about me. I deserved this. Yeah? I didn't belong. I never could be beautiful enough because of how I looked, because of my race. And even after coming out, I experienced something very similar in the LGBT community. Because of my race, I didn't belong. I had my first boyfriend, Matthew. Asshole. 1 year after I came out to my friends, and we only went out for like 3 months, so I couldn't even really call him my boyfriend, but I will. Because he was, that's what he meant for me at the time. And he is white. Again, not racist, I'm not racist. At the time, I was so happy that someone was into me. It just took me by surprise. And I chose to ignore his obvious fetishism, particularly of Japanese culture. And I wasn't even Japanese. And I remember he let out a sigh when I told him that. He was like, oh, okay. You know, I remember he even hit on another friend of mine while we were dating.
Is he also?
Asshole. No, he's white. He's white.
Oh.
Yeah. And he's in New York City, too. But you never bump into him. Anyway, so I ignored all of that shit because here was this white guy, this epitome in my head of what was beautiful, who was really into me, and I would do anything to stay with him. And God, I realize it now, but I had such low self-esteem and such low self-worth. And I stalked him on Facebook the other day. I looked at that and I was like, oh my God, he was not even cute. What was I thinking? I'm like, I'm so much cuter than he is. So, anyway, long story short, he broke up with me, and I was devastated, of course. And I even went to his apartment, I drove to his apartment in Jersey, thinking, like, I had this big speech in my head, and I'd be like, you fucker, like, how dare you do this to me? And I want my stuff, I want my DVDs. When he answered the door, I just said goodbye. That's all I did. So I didn't even do that. And so I really hated myself. I just did not see myself as worthy of standing up to myself. And it wasn't until I moved to New York City and I found other queer Asians through GAPIMNI, the Gay Asian Pacific Islander Men of New York, which I am now the chair. That I really, from this group, I really began to examine the racial roots of my self-hate. And it was a journey. Along the way, I mean, it's been 6 years. Yeah, it's been 6 years. Yeah, and along the way, I've entered into relationships I should not have entered into. And I entered into other relationships where my old habits of feeling unworthy of love and rejecting love came out, and it destroyed those relationships. So I'm still learning, but I identify as a lover. I put this as, what was it, number 4 on my list? Yeah, number 4. Because the wounds still run deep, and I still need to work on it. But here's what I've learned so far. Love is a practice that calls us to be our higher selves, not just in relationships, but also in our daily lives. And it starts with loving yourself. It starts with loving yourself. And that means unlearning all the shit that we've been told about who we are, our bodies and our minds. And I think this leads us all to see our own self-worth. And the politics I practice that I described to you earlier are intensely connected with love and self-worth. I believe that love is deeply connected to social justice. It's not just about romantic love, but love for our people and love for all marginalized people. Love is a practice, it's a verb. And I feel free now to practice it in all the ways I can. And that's me being a lover. Woo! Last one, I'm so sorry, last one.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay, I'm gonna go fast.
Dancer.
Okay. So this is new to me. I actually started dancing a few months after the retreat in Detroit, Michigan. So I was 22. Yeah, it was like mid-year, 22. And so for the longest time, I felt out of touch with my body. I think a lot of it was because of the self-hate that I had. And I was a skinny little thing growing up, skinny. Oh my God. And athleticism was never my strongest suit. I remember I was part of this neighborhood soccer club. I think it was my parents' attempt to butch me up because I was playing with Barbies and My Little Ponies all this time. And I remember like my early feelings of shame was like they had the ball and like you dribble it down. Is it dribble or you dribble a soccer ball, right? And it's going to the other goal, right? And I remember being surrounded by all these other guys and trying to steal the ball away from me, and I wouldn't pass the ball because I don't know if I had a big ego, or if I really wanted to get the goal, or I just wasn't good enough, but I didn't. And all the parents were freaking yelling at me. You know, and they were like, man, be a man, pass the ball, come on, make the goal. And I could not deal with that shit. And so that made me think a lot. Like, I was thinking about this, and I think about how boys are measured by their perception, or by the perception of their physicality and athleticism. And I was perceived to have neither. I have no doubt that some of this was tied to my race. And I know that I wasn't the most masculine, as it is traditionally defined in terms of how I looked and how I behaved. Few years of awkwardness and hating my body. Fast forward to my early 20s, still a skinny little thing. And I'm surrounded by images of buff, white, gay men as the standard of beauty. There's no denying it. There is a white standard of beauty. And a growing trend in gay culture to look a certain way to be desirable. As was the trend, I disconnected. I refused to join a gym. I refused to do anything physical, except for that. And I thought that someone would eventually take pity on me and have me as a boyfriend. And dance changed the way I view my body. Does anybody remember America's Best Dance Crew?
Yes.
It's now canceled.
What?
But that was actually, I know, right? Right? But that was like the impetus. That like I'd actually seen other Asian people dance, Calvin too. Seeing other people dance was like, you know, I should do this. You know, and also my friend had a Groupon. So I was just like, let's go to Alvin Ailey. Let's learn some let's learn some dance, right? And since then, I've been on a journey of discovering movement and my body. You know, growing up gay and Asian made me shrink into my body, but dance took me out of that. Dance helped me grow into the body I was meant to have. Dance also helped me embrace how I am in this world. I had all this baggage about masculinity and femininity and being perceived as feminine. And I knew in my head that all the norms associated with all of that is bullshit. Is bullshit. Femininity is perceived as weak, particularly in men. And this is even so in the mainstream gay community. Masculinity is prized over femininity. And that shit is sexist. That is so sexist. Because I feel like there's power in femininity. I just try dancing in heels. It's hard. I tried it. It's hard. So dance helped me appreciate and embrace the unique combination of masculine and feminine in me and others. And it made me realize how fluid it is. At any point, you can turn up the dial on any one of those poles. It's literally a performance. Some of the best dancers I know can do it all. They can dance femme, they can dance mask, they can do all that shit. Nowadays, I embrace the feminine in my performance for other men out there that feel shame in not being manly enough. But I also embrace the other pole too, so to speak. I get it. So all of this is to say, and I'm almost done, so I asked, what would it mean if we construct our desires to embrace all of the feminine and masculine, no matter how you identify, as I and others, many others do in dance? Because that's the world I want to live in. Yeah. So in closing, that's how I identify. There was son of immigrants. There's a lot of different stories, right? Mm-hmm. But all of our stories are complicated, they're messy, and it feels at the time that it doesn't really connect, but they do. Yeah, it was son of immigrants. It was Asian American, queer, lover, dancer. 6 years ago, it wasn't that. I don't have the list in front of me, but it wasn't that, right? So our identities and our stories are always evolving, yeah? And so one of the lessons I learned, I'm gonna give you three points in closing, yeah? These are the three things I learned. I'm gonna be really selfish here. These are the three things I learned from doing this exercise. Number one, home matters. Just matters. And if we can, because I know some of us can't, for whatever reason, we should try to return home. Number two, there's no perfect narrative. As I said before, our identities are messy, 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 messy. And how you might identify today may not be how you identify tomorrow. The people we choose to surround ourselves with will have a deep impact, and we stand on their shoulders. Let's remember that. And the last lesson that I learned is, it's not who you are now, but where are you going? Where are you going? Going through this exercise helped me see what was constant and transformative in my life. It was love, number one, for myself, for my family, and for my communities. Number two, it was justice. That justice isn't just for me, but for all of us. And the third one is liberation. That we must all work together to take off all of our chains, because all of us got chains. Whatever I do, wherever I go, this is what I hold. And I know in my heart it's going to take me far. Yeah? So, in this conference, as Lily and the rest of the team have asked, what's your story? But I also want to add, where do you want to go? Yeah? And what values will you hold moving forward? That's it.